Let's get it. This is Life's Essential Ingredients with Jeff and a Mike, where we hope to inform, inspire, and transform lives, one essential ingredient at a time. Welcome to the show. Here we go, listeners. We're back with another episode of Life's Essential Ingredients, and it's always my honor just to sit and interview guests that come and talk to us from all over the world. And I'm a early morning walker, and our guest's content was just on my heart this morning, and just pretty excited to get into this because I think she has an expertise that is just going to speak to everybody. And so I'm going to try and keep my comments down because I really want her to be able to highlight what she does for us, because I think she's going to help a lot of people. So you might want to get out a pen and paper for this one. If you're new to the show, let me take a step back. This is Life's Essential Ingredients, and it's part of a nonprofit called C4 Leaders. And we're in Northern California, and we're the only nonprofit to utilize the pizza making process. I love saying that, to create space for our companions to be seen, heard, and loved. We also write children's books, obviously host a show, and then we use the most amazing handmade, hand-tossed sourdough pizza to bring out the best in each other. So if you're interested in checking us out in that space, just go to pizzadays.org, and it's DAYS.org. So we are season 4, episode 13. We have Bev Mitelman coming, who's going to drop some serious knowledge. And first of all, I always like the listeners to know where to find her and where to reach out and get in touch. And I love the name of her business and website, securelyloved.com. Again, I'm just going to say it nice and slow, securelyloved.com. So about our guest, Bev is a certified attachment practitioner and founder of Securely Loved. Securely Loved is a company comprised of relationship and attachment trauma practitioners who work internationally to guide their clients through life's odyssey. As a child, Bev lived in a very unpredictable and chaotic environment where she never knew if she could rely on her parents to meet her emotional needs. This led her to absorb unhealthy relationship ideas based on what she was witnessing. She believed relationships were supposed to be unbalanced, uncertain, and overall chaotic. Prior to her current work, Bev was an executive leader, university lecturer, and published author. She has dedicated her entire career, 25 plus years, to working with adults in the realm of personal growth and professional development. Bev, thanks for sharing your many gifts with the world and for being our guest on Life's Essential Ingredients. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for the kind words. I'm thrilled to be here with you and your audience.
Yeah, let's go. And so Bev doesn't know, and if you listen in on a regular basis, you know we always start with a thought of the day, which is a quote that's picked after I research the guest. And this one is from Leo Buscaglia, and is also known as Dr. Love. And it's a simple one, but I think pretty deep. Change is the end result of all true learning. I'm going to say it again. Change is the end result of all true learning. Why would I pick that for you?
Such a beautiful quote. It's such a great intersection between the work that I was once doing in the nonprofit sector, because I've worked for such a long time in the education sphere. And it was always with soft skills. I was teaching about communication and social interactions. And we know that in an academic sense that we tend to use tests a lot, right? So what we're trying to do is ascertain if learning has taken place. Why? Because we're looking for the change. So it's a beautiful quote. And it means if I had given you, for example, a test on a topic that you knew nothing about, and then we talk about it, and then you take the same test, you're going to display a change in that you now have this newfound knowledge. So it's that change that actually indicates whether there's learning. Now, this, of course, in a much broader sense, can be applied to anything in life. All relationships, all love, all work that we do on ourselves as humans to understand our minds, to improve our physical health. Maya Angelou, her famous quote is, when you know better, do better. So if you now have information, apply it, do better. So we know that when we spend time learning and we actually process this information, and then we start applying it. When we start applying the learning, that's when it becomes knowledge and when we can see a change in the outcome. That's the only way as humans that we can actually ascertain that someone else has learned.
Mm.
Right? Like this, I know I went into a bit of a nerdy example there, but I love the quote that you picked for me. I really do. And it's like the simplest thing ever. So I have two older sons. They're 18 and 20 now. They're both in university. And when I'm struggling to do something silly on my phone and the technology, and they're teaching me about TikTok and they're making fun of me, right? Because I don't know how to use TikTok. And I always say to them, don't forget, I'm the one who taught you how to use a spoon. Right?
I love it. You always got that one to hang over their head.
Me
Oh
too.
man. Yeah. So I love how
You
you,
pulled a great quote. Thanks.
but I love how you took it to a different space because that's not why I picked it for you at all.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and it is, I mean, it is, and you hit I'm going to be taking notes the whole time. So don't think I'm on my phone. I'm always learning these
I
episodes.
do the
Love it.
same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So, but I wrote down newfound knowledge. And I think
Mm,
researching you and looking at your company, Securely Loved, and knowing a tiny little bit about the attachment theory, and we're going to get into that so much. But we all come in and then looking at your bio of how, and you didn't use the word normal, but and use the word more chaotic, but that was your norm until you found this newfound knowledge and said, you know what, I want to create change and I want to grow and to learn and to find my true self and kind of and in seeing you on paper and listening to you on another show or two, I was like, man, that quote just jumped right. And it's funny when you research on my end, the quotes literally after they jump out at you of like, nope, that's for Bev. And then now to know and to make me feel good just as a human that there's people like you and your team out there that are helping people create this change and find their true self, whatever their childhood and current circumstance might even be. But just knowing that there's this power inside us all to reach for something that's bigger than ourselves. And then there's people out there, to be able to help and guide. And so that's how I see you and Securely Loved and the team that you built there. And so, yeah, let's go to work.
That's so great. And I'm really glad that you pulled that quote. Because I believe, again, growth, learning is one of our six human emotional needs, right? So depending on where you prioritize it, but we all have that need to grow and learn. So yeah, thank you. That's beautiful.
All right. So this is like the simplest question, and you take it in which way you kind of it's mentioned in your bio, the introduction. But yeah, I want to get your take on it. I just like the listeners to oh, hey, what was life like for you growing up? And you can take that in any space you want. But just yeah, let the listeners kind of know who you are a little bit.
Sure. Um, so I believe in being really open and honest and authentic. And that is the way in which I have been able to get to a place of comfort and calm. I no longer hide things. I no longer keep secrets because that's very damaging. And so there was a point of time in which I wouldn't have talked about this so openly. But I'm hoping in doing so that it might inspire others that we don't need to carry around the shame, right? Because that's a heavy burden. So I did grow up in a household where uh, there was significant abuse, every kind of abuse except for sexual abuse, but definitely emotional, definitely psychological, mental, and also physical abuse. Now, I share this because I have a level of forgiveness towards my parents, because I truly believe that they did the best they could. But unfortunately, I think that they didn't, or they still don't understand the impact that this type of household can have on a child. And so that's my work today, is to work with these types of people who have come out of homes where they didn't receive consistent nurturing care from their parents. And I'm not talking about were you fed meals, were you given a bath, were you given clothes? That those are basic survival needs. I'm talking about emotional needs where your parents weren't emotionally attuned to you, right? Because this sets up a set of patterns in our mind, depending on how attuned your caregiver was with you, in terms of how you view the world, how you view yourself, how trusting you are with others, how engaged you are in relationships, your personality needs. There's a whole set of things. But to be really specific, we'll start off broad. To be more broad, folks who come from homes where they are generally well attuned and the parents are reliable and consistent. No such thing as perfection, but consistent. Generally, a child will grow up with the idea that the world is all about connections versus a child that comes out of a home where their emotional needs are not attuned to consistently. So there might have been neglect, for example. There might have been abandonment or perceived abandonment, right? There might have been issues, but maybe there was a very contentious divorce and a lot of fighting. Maybe there was a lot of chaos in the environment. Maybe one or both of the parents had a mental illness and there was an instability. There's so many scenarios where the child doesn't get the emotional attunement on a consistent level. Those children grow up with a very different lens of the world. And their lens is the world is about survival. And so you could imagine that that very much colors our perspective in terms of how we see ourselves, the partners that we choose, the way we show up in romantic relationships, our friendships, our relationships to family members, how we operate, let's say in a team setting at work. The impacts are pervasive, starting from a very, very young age. We get imprinted like under the age of 5, and then well into our adult years. And what happens is that we sort of rationalize it as, okay, this is just my baseline. This is just who I am. And we don't realize that, like with anything else in the body, we can unlearn and relearn things, right? So even if, for example, physically you have some challenges in your body, let's say you're carrying extra weight, there are things you can do, right? Steps you can take to get back into better physical health. And the same is true with your mind. So I do want to be very, very clear that when we're talking about attachment styles, and I have a feeling we're going to talk more about it, I'm just giving an intro. But when we're talking about attachment styles, we're talking about learned behavior. So I love that you brought up that quote about learning, because this is learned behavior that is learned really, really young, from an infant, from the time they come into this world to like 4 or 5 years old. We are not talking about mental illness here. So everyone has an attachment style. And your style, again, depends on what you saw, you heard, and you felt in those earliest of years. How's that for a little intro?
It's deep. That's why I told the listener,
It's so
get,
deep.
get out a pen and paper. And man, yeah, I'm already just scratching my head and you haven't even got into it. And I don't know that much about the attachment theory, which is why I wanted to really learn from you in this episode. But the little bit that I was reading about it, it's got deep roots in so many other parts of psychology.
Yes.
And then when you take in that it's applicable to everybody,
Everybody.
yeah, it's just powerful of knowledge that you have to have. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you, if, and again, it just, this is why these thoughts of the day just keep coming up. You know, if you want to change, and to me, life is all about change, you know, and
Yes.
to continue to grow, continue to make mistakes, continue to find your true learning for you, whatever that is, you know, good and bad. Um, but yeah, I think you're gonna help me a whole bunch in this episode and the listeners. So I think
I love that.
I'm going to shake it up because I want to kind of I want to get away from these other questions that I had started, because I feel like you've already, with your intro, kind of already planted a pretty good seed for into it. And I guess I'll let you kind of guide things, but I'm going to try it, and then you can say, "Oh, Jeff, this is a better place to go," because you know, but you know, emotions. You know, I think when we're growing up, we don't know what they are exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We feel things going on inside us. They result in certain behaviors that get displayed, you know,
Mm-hmm.
before we can, you know, label them and fully understand them. Let's just talk about emotions, first of all, and how those, you know, come into play, you know, throughout childhood, and then even as we are in adulthood now.
Such a great question. Such a great question. So, as adults, we can talk about how the mind processes this. As a child, it's the same process, but you're unaware of it, right? So, emotions is part of a series of things that happen in the mind. So, there's an equation that we like to use. It's BTEA. So, B stands for beliefs. T stands for thoughts, E is emotions, and A is actions. And so emotions don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen by themselves. And this is a linear process. So it's almost easier to work backwards. So if, for example, you're shouting at me in this moment, there's something that's compelling you to shout at me. Okay? Behind that is an emotion. Behind the emotion is a thought. And behind the thought is a belief or a core wound. So our behavior as humans is not random, right? And where do those core beliefs come from? Back to the childhood.
Mm.
So yeah, it's super interesting. So I could jump into what attachment styles are sort of in general so that we can figure out how all of this works together.
I would like that, but I want to go back real quick because
Sure.
I love how you said let's work backward. I'm a practical guy. I love the acronyms. I'm a nurse, is what I did for 29 years.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful work.
so I love all the acronyms and stuff, but you said let's work backward. And then you said actions. And it was BTEA, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. And,
Hmm.
you know, so I put down, you know, actions, and you said shouting, you know, at Bev. So I'm shouting at you. Emotions, well, I'm angry, you know, if I'm shouting. And then the thoughts are those, maybe, hey, maybe you were late and I got another meeting here. And so I'm kind of pissed already because you're coming in this thing late, you know. And then the beliefs, where does, yeah, that's all just back to childhood stuff, you think? of yeah, I mean, how that's where my mind is
Okay.
when, yeah, like, wait a second, because all these other ones are pretty practical, and
Okay.
then you get to the beliefs, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky because I think this is gold right here already, with what you're
Okay. I
thinking.
love that. Okay. Let's play it out a little bit more. Okay. So let's say yeah, you and I are it doesn't, let's say we're coworkers. Okay. And you're shouting at me. Okay. So that's an action, it's a behavior. Okay. So the thoughts, sorry, the emotion behind that is you said, I'm angry. Well, generally, anger is a secondary emotion, which means it's an emotion that we feel after the primary emotion. So, in the moment where you are elevated, your emotions are escalated, and you're shouting, you're not often feeling anger. Anger usually comes afterwards when you think about it and you're like, I am so angry with Bev. Right. But in the moment, you're usually thinking something else. You're frustrated, you're anxious, you're nervous. Like, so why are you shouting at me? Okay, let's pretend that I missed a deadline for a particular project. So you're shouting at me because the emotion is you could be frustrated, right? You could be feeling sad. You could be feeling anxious. You could be feeling overwhelmed. You could be feeling all these things, right? So the first thing that I usually, when I work with people, I say, okay, let's try and isolate which emotion you're actually feeling, right? And understanding how to identify the emotions in our body and the physical sensations that come along with that are so critically important because we are often not taught this, as you already alluded to. We're not really taught this. And if we didn't grow up in a home where this was modeled for us, we certainly weren't taught it, right? I like to say that some people grow up in a home and they learn how to cook, and some people grow up in a home and they don't learn how to cook. Right? Right. And so some people grow up in a home and they don't really understand the full range of their emotions. Their emotions are given no space. They don't learn to connect. When my heart is racing and I start to feel a little dizzy and my muscles are tense, what is that telling me? Right? What we do is we go, ooh, that's an uncomfortable feeling. I'll go and distract myself, or I'll use a substance, or because we step away from those uncomfortable feelings. But it's important work to understand this is the emotion. This is my body telling me there's an emotion, and I should respect that. So, moving off of the emotion, let's go on to the thoughts now. So, you're feeling sad, you're feeling anxious, you're overwhelmed, you're frustrated. All of these emotions are coming up. Your action is you're yelling. But what's the thought? The thought could be something like, oh my God, if I don't get this report in on time, I'm going to get fired. Right? Or, oh crap, now I'm going to have to work on the weekend and my wife is going to be upset with me. There's something there. There's something that or oh, now my boss is going to think I'm incompetent. Or now I have to go and tell my boss that I hired the wrong person. And I don't want to feel that shame that I made a bad choice. So there's a reason why you're so driven at that point, right? There's something driving the emotion. Now, if we step it back even one step further and we go, okay, what is the belief? It's also called limiting belief. It's also called core wounds. Okay, this is very much connected to attachment styles. So we all carry a certain set of core wounds, limiting beliefs about ourselves. And so in this particular case, you could have, for example, a core belief that I'm not good enough. And so it's really hitting on that button because something has gone wrong. You're afraid you're going to get blamed for it. You're yelling. But what you're really doing is that the core belief, I am not good enough, is surfacing. Or you could have a core belief of, you know, uh, I will be rejected. I am not likable. I will be excluded. I will be abandoned. Now I'm like telling you all of these, not all of them are relevant, of course, to this scenario, but those core beliefs that we carry are attached to, again, our attachment style, and they have a massive impact on our thought patterns, our emotional patterns, and ultimately our behavior or our actions. And to make this even more fascinating, I'm glad you told me that you're a nerd because I'm such a nerd. Okay, so to make this even more fascinating is that none of this is going on in your conscious mind. So your conscious mind, which is your awareness, is responsible for 3 to 5% of your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior. Your subconscious mind is really the one that's in the show. The subconscious mind is really right below your conscious awareness. And yeah, your subconscious mind runs the show. They are responsible for 95 to 97%. So most of your thoughts, your patterns, and your behavior or your actions. And so all of this is happening under your conscious awareness. So let's go back to you shouting again. And so I'm standing there and you're shouting at me, and I might turn around and ask a very reasonable question and go, Jeff, why are you shouting at me? And in frustration, you might go, I don't know. I just really felt like you actually might not even know, right? But in that moment, you've hit your limit, right? And that's truthful. You might actually not even be able to recognize. You might get flustered and go, I'm just really flustered.
Yeah.
So it depends on your level of awareness that you have with the patterns in your own mind and how well you understand them. And then, of course, once you understand them, you can communicate them. So, if we had done the work together and you were shouting, and I would say, Jeff, why are you shouting right now? You would say, you're right. I'm going to stop shouting. I'm sorry. I'm just feeling a little sad, or I'm feeling, a little bit of shame. I'm going to go take care of that. This is not about you.
Yeah, it's still, I think we spend the whole 10 hours kind of going over these little scenarios, but I just keep, the word trigger just keeps popping up into my head for those beliefs of, and then just going back to whatever it was when you were growing up that put those subconscious thoughts perhaps in there that just come out, like you were saying, you're not even aware of it. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating, this work that you do. But I want to move on to the actual, if you can somehow, this might be too difficult, but simplify before you get into the attachment styles, but simplify just the theory. If there's anybody that was like wanting to learn more, because I don't know. I think this is something that every last person on the earth should have a basic understanding of, so they know who they are.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really do. And I want to say, just from a personal note, because I did have a difficult childhood, I had worked with many therapists over the years, and we know that there are various different modalities of therapy. And I think that the modalities I had tried, like CBT and inner child, it was helpful to a certain degree, but it never really got me to the place of, hey, now that I understand, what do I do about it? How do I move past it? And so when I found this work on attachment theory years ago, it changed me. It helped me change my mind, which was at the root of, my dysregulated nervous system. And we could talk a little bit later about dysregulated nervous systems, right? I'm going to take a note about that because we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what this is really about at the end of the day. Um,
Before you get into it, I just want to make sure that listeners know this isn't something that just popped up overnight. I mean, I think, and I could be wrong, was it Bowlby that was one
Yeah,
of, yeah, and that was back in
yeah.
the 70s.
The early studies are in the 50s, and
Yeah,
then Mary Ainsworth came on. And so this is
yeah,
definitely not coming from overnight, but it seems to be getting a little bit more exposure these days. I think there's further work that's being done to understand that how this shows up in adulthood. So the work that I do specifically now is taking that foundational work from John Bowlby, and we could talk about that study if you'd like, and talking about now that we have a fully formed adult who has this certain patterning of a particular attachment style, uh, how does this impact them in terms of their needs, their communication style, their emotional patterns, their relationship to boundaries, and then their behavior and coping mechanisms. And it's highly predictive in that there is very specific behaviors that people do, um, depending on where they fall on. It's a spectrum, right? Attachment styles. It's not these nice little neat boxes. Um, but John Bowlby did this study back in the 50s, and really what he was initially looking at, right, is studies about emotional bonding. Right, that's what attachment is. It's an emotional bond to another human. And what he did is he observed very young children with their primary caregivers. For the most part, it was their mothers. And he would observe the children together with their caregivers, and the caregivers would then be asked to leave the room. Now, I don't know if you're a parent or you've seen this type of when a mother is separated from a child, what could possibly go wrong, right? And so they watch all this. Some of the children go frantic, right? They're looking everywhere. They're, what happened? Where did mommy go? Right? Some of the children, they look and they go, oh, okay, and they go back to playing with their toys. And some of the children don't even notice. And they're like, what, mommy went somewhere? And then the second part is they re-invite the mothers back into the room and they watch those reactions. And some of the children, again, respond frantically, like, mommy, mommy, mommy. And they sort of, grab onto their leg, right? And it's like, don't leave me, don't leave me. And some of the children go, oh, mommy's back. Hi, look, I'm playing with Lego. And other children, again, don't even take notice. Like whether the mother's in the room or not in the room doesn't impact them. Right? So this is the start, the formation of what we know as attachment styles, right? So this gets imprinted really, really, really early on in the first 0 to 5 years, depending on the level of interaction that you have with your caregiver. So there's actually when John Bowlby first did this work, he was talking about 3 primary styles. The work has been expanded to say that in fact we have 4 styles. So I will be talking about it in today's current landscape that we have 4 styles. So I'm going to try and do this really simply, but it's beautifully fascinating. So the first style is secure. Okay, so someone that has a secure attachment, that is, again, the person that we talked about early on in this show, the person who sees the world as, a beautiful set of connections. They were given a level of consistent attunement to their emotional needs from their caregiver, which meant that they knew that if they cried, their caregiver would attune to them. They knew that, if something was wrong, they could communicate and that there would be space held for their emotions. And so they learned to identify their emotions, understand their emotions, communicate their emotions, all this beautiful stuff. And they had a high degree of trust in themselves because they learned to tune into themselves. And they had a high degree of trust with others as well, because the consistency in their household was there. So why wouldn't they have a trust, right? Those folks are secure. Now, on the other side of the fence, we talk about folks who have insecure attachment. And insecure attachment gets further delineated into uh, it's really a continuum where you have folks who are anxious, preoccupied on one side. Okay, so the child in the study who went frantic when the mother left the room, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me. That gives you a sense of what the anxious, preoccupied is. On the other side, the dismissive, avoidant. So the child in the study who didn't even notice if you were there or not, because typically they're emotionally neglected. So they become hyper independent, overly self reliant. They don't even notice if you're there or not. They got it. They learned that, right? Now, and there is a fourth category that's in the middle, which is called the fearful avoidant. Now, the fearful avoidant has traits from the anxious, preoccupied, and the dismissive avoidant. They're often called the hot and cold partner. So they tend to oscillate between being anxious and dismissive, depending on the interaction that they're having with someone. And this is a category again that came out a little bit later after the initial studies. I myself spent a good part of my life as a fearful avoidant. Oftentimes, we find in the background of people's, their childhood or their history. Oftentimes, we find abuse, and I want to describe what this actually comes from. So the core wound of the fearful avoidant is I will be betrayed. The core wound of the anxious preoccupied is I will be abandoned. The core wound of the dismissive, the dismissive avoidant is rejection. So there is something that is flawed about me. If you come too close, you will realize that I am flawed and you will reject me. Now, these folks carry all sorts of other core wounds as well, but those are the primary to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. And particularly the fearful avoidance, it's hard to understand the I will be betrayed. Like, where does a child learn I will be betrayed? Well, I'll share with you my own experience and then also what's in the literature and what we know to be true is when a child experiences the confusing situation, pardon me, whereby they're desperate to get the attention, validation, love, and comfort from the person that they love, right? Their caregiver. In this case, I'm referencing my father. And so, his love and attention is just, it's golden for me, right? As a little child. But that same person is also harming you physically, emotionally, psychologically. So the child becomes so disorganized in their thought for reaching out to this person for comfort, also knowing that that person is hurting them. And so you could imagine that what they experience is a high degree of anxiety and a high degree of avoidance. And they're quite confused and disorganized. In fact, the other term for fearful avoidant is called disorganized attachment. That's another term that's used in the literature as well. And so you could imagine when that child grows up and they start going into a romantic relationship, they're the type of partner that we sometimes come across, because they're the rarest kind, but sometimes we come across the partner that is, come towards me. I really want to be intimate with you, but then they push you away. They're terrified of intimacy. No, come closer. I want to be close with you, but then they push you away. That flip-flopping back and forth is a pattern that's been set in our minds because this person, of course, we're all human, right? Again, I desperately, in those years where I hadn't figured out my own mind, I desperately wanted love and connection. And again, one of these beautiful human needs that we have, but I was terrified of intimacy because in my mind, not even metaphorically, in real life, if I get too close to you, you're going to hurt me. I've experienced it. I'm not even making it up. It comes from real life. So you can see how powerful these patterns are. And the thing is that we're not always, many people are not consciously aware of why we do certain things, right? So, why, if I'm in the middle of conflict, why do I have this like incredible need to pull away or to run away and it comes from, again, our attachment styles. So once you start opening up this box and you go, oh my God, now I understand this. Now it's making sense. That's just the starting point. Awareness is the starting point. Then you realize, oh my God, I really can change this. Because again, my mind is malleable. The things that I learned, I can unlearn them. And we have very specific tools that we use to work in the subconscious mind with people so they can repattern healthier beliefs, which, as we talked about earlier, then impacts your thoughts, which impacts your emotions, which impacts your behavior. And so it's like we can go to the root of this. So, anyways, I that was sort of a long. I'm such a nerd. I could talk about this for days, but it's fascinating, isn't it?
No, definitely got so much that I want to say. And first of all, thanks for having the courage to share your story and your pain. And yeah, I was getting goosebumps just listening to you a bunch. And yeah, I do have two kids, two daughters. They're
Oh,
actually my oldest getting ready to get married here on Saturday. And
congratulations.
yeah, so excited. But yeah, but just yeah, sorry you went through that, but thank you for having the courage to seek help and to continue to be on your healing journey. If I'm Yeah, I guess let me get just two thoughts out because you talked about the rarest kind, the fearful avoidant, and not that it probably matters because it just is what it is. But if I'm a listener, I'm thinking, oh man, where where probably do I fall on this? What percentages of people of your clients maybe or in the research that you've done, where are we as a society, men, women, other in kind of these numbers? Because I think it's always important to know that everybody's got something, and I think obviously knowledge is power. And if you can gain somewhat of an understanding of these different attachment styles, and then you're interacting with other people, not that you're going to be the guru, but maybe you start to see people in a different way and give them some grace, knowing that we're all carrying something.
Yeah. And give yourself a little grace too,
Yeah.
right? So we all behave in ways that maybe we're not proud of, but a lot of times, if we're thinking about folks who have insecure attachment styles, they're living in fight or flight. They're in survival, right? It talks about the child who comes out of the secure home thinks the world is about connection. The children who come out of an insecure home, they think the world is about survival, right? And so they spend a lot of time in their parasympathetic nervous system mode, which is your fight or flight, right? There's actually four. It's not just fight or flight. There's actually freeze is a trauma response also, and fawning, which is people pleasing, and that is heavily used by those that are anxious, preoccupied. Um, so in terms of numbers, again, we don't diagnose people. This is not an illness. It's self-reported. it's learned behavior. And so, it's possible that some of the numbers are a little bit off. They've been disputed. But generally, when I speak, I say that half of the population in North America is secure, and the other half, let's say 50%, falls somewhere on the spectrum of insecure attachment. Now, we have about the same numbers of anxious, preoccupied, and dismissive avoidant. And it's estimated to be 7 to 10% of our population falls in the fearful avoidant category that I mentioned.
Mm.
So that gives you a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So while you're talking, the other part of me as a parent, wishing I would have had this talk, forever ago before, I had my kids. But if I'm a young parent that's listening, or an old parent, you're still parenting, I'm thinking, man, what can I do to help my kids or grandkids, hopefully get into this space where they can just figure out who they are, and have a secure kind of mindset and yeah. What are some things that parents can do? It's not an easy job.
No, it's not. And I think I mentioned I raised two boys. They're both off at university now. It is the most challenging and, of course, the most rewarding thing that I've ever done in my life. And as a parent, I'm very clearly can say that I certainly did not do everything right. Like, I think we learn as we go.
Mhm.
Right. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is that attachment styles are not gendered. So you often hear about, for example, men who are dismissive avoidant and women who are anxious preoccupied. The internet likes to twist things a little bit sometimes, into the realm that it's not necessarily true. So it's not gendered, right? Anyone can fall on this. What is gendered, unfortunately, and maybe that's changing a little bit today, but generally speaking, is the way that we socialize our kids, right? So we still have some specific, I would say, ideas around which emotions are considered to be acceptable. So again, I think it's changing today. I'd like to think it's changing, but I'll use myself as an example. When I was younger, it was very clear in my household that little girls were not to show anger. We were not to show, like, it was not, it was just, it was punished. It was not accepted. It was just, you can't do that. You can't show frustration. I was brought up in an era where, like little girls, sit over there, be cute, be seen and not heard. Don't cause problems. And so what a child does is they have to make a really important choice, because for a child to survive, they have to keep the connection to their caregiver. So they're naturally going to try to please the caregiver because they know their survival is dependent on it. And Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this all the time. So what the child does inadvertently, unconsciously, is they trade in their authenticity. So if they're feeling angry, they learn not to show it. They learn to put on a smile whether they're happy or not, because they don't want the punishment, they don't want the disappointment, and they want their caregiver to be happy with them. And children naturally do this. Okay, I'll stop crying, right? Don't be mad at me. That's the people pleasing, the fawning. So, and on the other end of things, if we're talking about little boys, again, I don't think this is so much today's narrative, but I mean, I can't tell you how many times I heard, boys don't cry, suck it up, this sort of. So again, it's like we're bastardizing certain emotions. Like, it's okay to be angry and you can feel proud. That's okay, but you can't feel sad and you can't feel anxious. And over here, you can't feel this. And children pick up on these messages based on how their caregiver responds to these emotions when they come up. And children learn very quick. We learn, right? And so if I put on a smile and I'm sweet as pie, I get lots of affection and it doesn't matter if I feel completely sad inside. I'm trying to please my caregiver. And so this is the beginning of disassociating from your emotions, right? Because you're trying to please your caregiver. So one of the things that I tried to do with my own kids, again, I made plenty of mistakes. I still do, but one of the things that I tried to do was to always leave space for their emotions and to communicate with them, help them identify what their actual emotions meant, right? And emotions are there to serve a purpose, right? Emotions guide us. So if you're thinking about a scenario afterwards and you're like, oh God, I'm really angry with Bev. I don't like how that conversation went. It's the most beautiful indicator that somehow I crossed your boundary. There's something I did or said that didn't sit well with you, right? So that anger serves a purpose, right? If I get aggressive, it's because I perceive a threat, right? If I'm feeling anxious, it's because there's something that I feel like is a little overwhelming, or maybe I'm worried about performing or doing something to the best of my ability. There's all of these lessons that we can learn from the emotions if you learn how to understand where they sit in your body and how to interpret what they're trying to tell you. And physically, your body will also tell you this stuff. It's so fascinating because we don't learn this. But for many, many years, I had this really weird thing that happened on my eyelid. My eyelid would flutter and I didn't know what it was. And so I went to a couple of eye doctors and they couldn't see it. And I was like, no, it's happening right now. It was actually only I could feel it. You couldn't see it. And many years later, I realized that that was a physical response to tell me that I needed more sleep and my body was stressed. And so when my eyelid starts to flutter again, I go, oh, hi, old friend. Got it. I got to get a good night's sleep tonight. Okay. Like they're there to guide us, right? So one of the most beautiful things that you can do with your own children is to leave space for their emotions, let them talk, which also means that you might hear things that you don't want to hear. If they're angry with you and you did something, you might not like or enjoy hearing, Mom, I really didn't like the way that you talked to me in that moment. But it's being mature enough to understand that you, as the adult, you have the ability to regulate. Right? Children have far less of an ability to regulate, and you're still forming their minds. So take it as the adult, take the hit and go, okay, explain to me what upset you. I didn't like the tone of your voice. It just sounded a little too nasty. You didn't have to be so nasty. That's how teenagers talk now, right? So, okay, what would you have preferred that I said? Well, I mean, you could have just asked me why I did that instead of yelling. Fair enough. Thank you for telling me, and we'll try and do that next time. All of a sudden, the child is giving me beautiful information around how they want to be communicated to. You've given space for their emotions, which is the underlying message is your emotions matter to me. Right? You could also take the opportunity at that point in time, if there's certain physical sensations that they're feeling, to go, what are you feeling in this moment? And most children, even most adults, will go, I don't know. Okay, well, close your eyes for a minute. Are you feeling like your muscles are tense? You feeling a little dizzy? Does your heart feel like it's pounding? Do you feel like you just want to put your hand into a fist? Do you feel like you want to bolt? What is the feeling? Okay, good. That's your anger feeling. Now you know what it is because it's going to help you for the rest of your life because it's going to be there when it needs to be there. So I have a very, very honest relationship with my kids. We talk about anything and everything. And I leave space for them to say, you know what, Mom, I didn't like when you did this. Or I didn't, because how else am I going to understand, what they consider to be disrespectful? But I have to tell you, when you talk, when you have that relationship with the kids too, the kids also make, I believe, a great effort to show you respect. This is the most beautiful thing is they turn around and I could say to them, listen, I didn't like the way you talked to me. And they'll allow space for my emotions because I've taught them how to do it. So I think that instead of shutting down our emotions, a lot of families sweep things under the rug. It just didn't happen, or stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about, or, I'm too busy. We'll talk next week about it. Next week is useless, right? So when you are unavailable to your children for their emotional needs, the message is, I'm not important, right? If I was more important, they would make time for me. So we talk about where the core wounds come from. You can see how an adult child will develop the I'm not important,
Oh,
right? Or right, because they get these messages based on what is given to them from their caregiver, right? So yeah, great question.
it's just yeah, all this is just so fascinating. I'm just taking all these notes, and I just the highlight for me was just the healthy communication kind of role modeling. And I think that's getting to be harder and harder the busier people get and the more distracted we are, and with all the other thoughts that are going on and kind of hijacking our ability just to sit and just be. And in order to really have healthy communication, you got to be able to enter that space, because then you have the patience, and you to tap into your parasympathetic nervous system, like you were talking about, to get your cortisol level to drop, get your heart rate up, to slow your breathing down, to slow down your thoughts, and then allow you to just kind of be and say, all right, hey, let's just experience what's going on. And I love, I've done a lot of work with kids, and kids just tell the truth. And I've always,
yes, they do.
they don't have the filter like you were talking about. And I really appreciate that about them. And I wanted to see, I'm sure you're probably aware of it, but have you, and it's a little bit of an older book, but Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett. Have you ever, he's a Yale guy, but really,
I haven't read it, but should I put it on my list?
you should,
Okay.
especially for the parents. I'm guessing we'll get into it. We haven't even talked really about what you do. We've just been tapping into your incredible brain, but I'm sure the parents that you see, it's a really good tool for just helping people understand their emotions. And even just the title, Permission to Feel. And then he has this simple acronym that he uses, this ruler. And it's recognize, understand, label, express, and then regulate. And it's about all these different emotions. And then he puts them in these 4 quadrants. But I don't want to get too long. But just in listening to you, I was like, yeah, this book would be really good for some of the listeners that might want to take another step in learning. But then they can also just go to securelyloved.com. And Bev offers she offers a free quiz if you were interested in your attachment style. She has all kind of online courses and workshops, a free ebook, and even a free consult. But this that you haven't been so gracious, you haven't talked about in this show. It just is what it is. But I feel like it's so appropriate. Kind of tell people a little bit about Securely Loved, and what is it that sets you apart from other people in this space, and why people should they be like, yeah, I want to learn more. I got some issues I'd love to talk to Bev about. Why do they want to go talk to you and your team?
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, attachment trauma is a very, very specific field. So, really, the work that we do is first and foremost always that awareness piece, which, as you mentioned, the quiz would be a great place to start. So, on my website, there is a free quiz. so that you can get an idea of where you're falling in your attachment style. But the idea is to not stop there. We then will use a number of different tools to work with your subconscious mind to repattern new connections. So once we're able to identify what your core wounds are, we're also able to repattern new thoughts. So, for example, if my core wound is I am unlikable or I am unlovable, right? So I'll use a generic example. Let's say a woman comes to me and she's dating and she's not having much success in dating. But she's got this core wound that I am unlovable. And she's unaware of the fact that that's impacting her emotions, her thoughts, and her behavior as she shows up on the dates. It's greatly impacting her confidence, her self-worth, and her dates are feeling this, right? And it's like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I am unlovable. So she appears, unlovable. What she really has to do is inner work to where is that coming from? And let's turn it on its head. I am lovable. And we can reprogram the subconscious mind to be able to use new scripts, which of course impacts our thoughts, emotions, and behavior. So yes, I work with clients internationally to not only understand their attachment trauma, but then to identify their core wounds, to reprogram them, to identify their personality needs. And we have all sorts of needs, right? We have core needs, emotional needs as humans, right? There's like 6 of them, right? Certainty, uncertainty, significance, contribution, love and connection, and growth, right? So where are your priorities for your needs? And then we look at personality needs. And this is where it's so interesting because depending on, again, your attachment style, we often see some very specific trends. So someone who's anxious, preoccupied, this person generally will rank love and connection as being their top need, right? This is incredibly important to them. And then their personality need will be social interactions, friends, a romantic partner, sex. Like they need that closeness. Well, what do they need that closeness for? That's the question. They need it in order to feel safe. So all of these insecure attachment styles, anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful avoidant, the one core wound that they all have that's in common, and there's only one, it is I am unsafe, which is it's really deep.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's one, of course, that we look to work on as well. And so we then take a look at identifying clients' personality needs and take a look at their communication style. Now, this becomes so incredibly important because many people, I mean, I see a lot of like memes on the internet and I have discussions and people say, yes, you have to be more communicative and you have to tell people what you need. But the problem is before that, like the problem is I can only communicate to you what I need if I understand what I need. And a lot of people don't understand what they need. They just get frustrated when they don't get it, right? But they don't even understand that they need it. And then they get frustrated and they can't articulate it. And then there's conflict. And then 2 partners, let's say romantic partners, we're expecting them to read each other's mind. This happens often. So the exercise to bring someone through understanding their own needs is really critically important because then it really impacts their communication style. So if you know that as an anxious, preoccupied, and again, I want to say the goal of the work is to bring someone towards secure attachment. Okay? People who are insecurely attached are generally don't have the skills around emotional regulation. Because going back to some people learned to cook and some people didn't. emotional regulation was never modeled for them. And so that's why some of the behaviors can look outwardly as being a little exaggerated. They often will trigger strongly. They're considered more volatile, right? Secure people are generally like, all is good. Not that they don't have triggers, but their triggers are softer. They're not as often. But someone who is insecurely attached will often be emotionally dysregulated until they do that work, right? And what does that look like, emotional dysregulation? Well, someone who cannot manage their emotions in a healthy way, especially when under duress, right? So they do a bunch of things that we would consider to be um, not 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 pleasant for the next person, right? So if we're talking about in a romantic relationship, uh, you know, there might be a lot of shouting, there might be a lot of avoidance, these are things that people are doing that are not healthy communication, but in fact what they're trying to do is just regulate their nervous system. So when you're talking to someone and you're in a fight with them and they're like, I can't do this, and the hand goes up and they walk out of the room, have you seen this before, Jeff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a person saying, I'm at my emotional limit. I need to be alone. I need to calm down. And that's the person who's generally the dismissive avoidant who was generally left alone in childhood and was, emotionally neglected. So they learned how to self-soothe, but by themselves. They're overly independent. So it's like, okay, let me go for a walk. I'm fine. I'm going to go do my own thing. And they can disappear for an hour or 4 days, right? But what they're trying to do is regulate their nervous system, bring it back into sympathetic nervous system mode, which is your calm state, right? Out of the fight or flight. And a person who's anxious, preoccupied, if their core wound is, I will be abandoned, and there's an argument there, and let's say the partner says, I can't do this, and walks out of the room. This partner whose core wound is, I will be abandoned, having them leave, take space, go regulate their nervous system completely activates this person because now they feel like their survival is threatened, right? So they've got this abandonment wound. So what did they do? They chase. They generally chase after the person. They want to close the proximity. They want to talk now. They'll even start another fight with you because they just want to be close to you because that they're incapable of self-soothing. They have to go outward to someone else to soothe, right? They don't have that skill. So this person who's anxious, preoccupied generally needs a lot of external validation. Generally is considered to be clingy, needy. And I love the word needy. We all have needs, right? But they're more outwardly expressive. Whereas the other person who's running away is completely internalizing it. Two very, very different behaviors, both trying to do the same thing. They're both trying to calm their own nervous system in complete opposite ways. And as luck would have it, in a romantic context, these two often find themselves in partnerships.
Yeah, and they're not compatible unless they go get the guidance from Securely Loved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really they're not terribly emotionally compatible unless they start to understand that, listen, there are ways that both of them can learn to co-regulate, which means regulate on your own and with your partner, right? And there are things that you can do. But this is why a lot of relationships break up and people say, oh, it's because you weren't communicating well. I believe people do the best that they can. But if they don't understand these dynamics, you'll just go this loop of doom.
Yeah. No,
Right? You'll keep triggering each other.
that's why my brain is just hurting right now. So listeners, I sure hope you're
In a good way, Jeff. I hope in a good way.
in the best possible way.
Oh, good. Okay.
There's just so much good information. And again, it makes so much sense, but it's so deep at the same time. And definitely
Yeah.
just so glad that there's resources out there. Such a
Yeah.
really love to help people, guide. And because at the end of the day, we all want just fulfillment and to feel loved and whatever that means for each person. But getting these pieces of the puzzle that were just in there a little bit wrong, maybe, and getting them cleaned up a little bit to fit in to where it makes sense for each person, then to be able to paint your Picasso, so to say. It's just, yeah, is what we all want, and hopefully
What we all want. But I gotta tell you, people come to me and they want me to help them fix their relationship. And really the work I do, which I believe is much more effective, is at the beginning work with the folks individually, because you have to understand your own mind, your own patterns, and why you're doing certain things, and make a commitment to change, because clearly it's not serving the dynamic. And depending on how far you are on that continuum, it's very possible, again, that you're not emotionally regulated. And if you're not emotionally regulated, you're spending a lot of your time in that parasympathetic nervous system mode, that fight or flight. And that is, it's a terrible way to live. I lived this way for so many years, and I thought that's just my baseline. But it's not. I now know what it feels like to have a regulated nervous system, and it is heaven. Because I used to wake up and I was like, on a scale of, out of 10, I was like an 8 or 9 out of 10. I just woke up. Nothing happened. Right. So you could imagine that that's like a simmering volcano. So if anything transpires in the day that's stressful, it breaches, your ability to deal with it, because you're already so heightened in your emotional state. And people live like this for years and years and years. Often we call that a burnout too. Our sometimes our medical environments like to medicalize this stuff, like you have generalized anxiety and you have this and you have that. It doesn't feel good to be in this heightened state. You're on edge, you're irritable, you're hypervigilant, you're not nearly as creative, you can't focus, you can't sleep, on and on and on. And so I tell people that the beauty in this is that when you figure out your own mind and you actually realize, wait a minute, I can change my mind. Just like if I commit to losing 20 pounds, I can. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but I know I can do it. So if you commit to it and the prize at the other end of that, work that you're doing, is that I'm going to wake up and now I'm a 2 out of 10, and I'm going to feel good, and I'm going to feel joyful, and I'm going to feel calm in my body. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be able to live my truer self. And for me, that just means dive into my creativity, engage in my passions, do things that bring me joy. You can't live like that when you're in fight or flight, because all you're trying to do is survive. Right. So that I wish people would know how good it is to actually get to a place where you are emotionally regulated. And so that's a byproduct of becoming more securely attached. And then once you're in a much better place, you could imagine it becomes very obvious that the relationship that you have, a lot of those issues, especially if your partner is doing their own work as well, a lot of those issues will get resolved, or they'll be resolved with, far less effort. You'll give each other more grace. Or if you're not in a relationship and you decided you want to seek a relationship, all of a sudden you've positioned yourself as the type of person that you want to attract.
Mm.
and like attracts like. Right. So if you're a roller coaster and you're emotionally dysregulated, you're yelling one minute, you're laughing the next minute you're crying. I mean, oof, that's a lot to handle for yourself and for anyone else around you. I mean, have you met people like this, Jeff?
Oh yeah. No, and they're like vampires though for me. It just takes too much because I'm a little bit more even keeled and I'm pretty mindful of my energy and where it goes. And yeah, it gets to be too much for me. Yeah, to be in that space. But hey, I want to be mindful of your time. And I got two last questions. One is a simple one. Any book you would recommend for someone to read, and it doesn't have to be about attachment theory, but just a good book to help them figure out, because there's so many great takeaways from this episode for sure. But the one that I'm really leaving with is you have to put in the work to yourself, and to understand who you are. And then that change is the end result of all true learning, which ties back into our thought of the day, which is just
Yeah.
powerful. But any book that you recommend?
I have a couple of books. I'm writing them down as you speak. You really did pull a great quote.
It always, I've used these thought of the days for probably the last 25 years. And it's crazy. I've been a high school, college basketball coach. My last job, I was a nursing professor. I would start off every class with the thought of the day. And it's nuts how it would come up 5, 6, 7, 8 times throughout whatever the lesson, the practice. And I just love it. And it's weird for me picking them because it's just like somebody else is just shining a light down on them. That's the one, and then it just comes out. And if you play this back, I mean, the amount of times you mentioned change and learning and true self, and it's all tied into that simple but so deep and profound quote from Dr. Love. But all right,
Yeah.
into your books.
So there are two books that are, I would say, loosely related to attachment styles, but more so understanding trauma, right? So attachment trauma is a very specific type of trauma. These books really talk about how trauma gets stored in the body, and the impact that it has on our physical and mental health. And so I think it's, as an adjunct to attachment styles, this is very important work to understand. So I recommend this to all my clients. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Gabor Mate. He's written a number of books. One of his more recent books is The Myth of Normal. So I generally stray away from the word normal because I don't even know what normal means. I think it's sort of like a useless word. I don't really know what normal means, but and he's playing up on that a little bit. So the myth of normal, what's normal. The second book that had an incredible impact on me was by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk.
I already know what
And
you say.
The Body's Gonna Keep the Score.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's just really, really important work to understand. I think, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but in our medical system here in North America, we tend to treat the body as, like we have specialists, right? For your heart and your kidney and your skin and your eyes, and it's all one body, right? And psychiatrists and just for the mind, and dentists for our teeth. And to me, I don't really understand why it's so segmented. And there is a far stronger connection, in my belief, of the mind and the body. So if the mind is holding on to trauma, it does get stored in the body. The book goes into great detail around this. And I think that, understanding your mind and connecting back to your body, the signals that it's telling you, is critically important for healing work.
I love it. Two great recommendations. I have the second one. I'm gonna get the first one. All right. Hey, we're at the end of the show, and it's been an incredible episode. Thank you again. But we always end with a quote from John Austin that says, "The only thing you take with you when you're gone is what you leave behind." So now I want to fast forward. I know how old you are just from researching you, but we're going to give you another 50 years of living. And you look amazing, by the way. And 50 years of living, and you're on your deathbed, not to sound morbid, but and you're surrounded by all the people that have been instrumental in your life. And what is it as you're getting ready to take your last breath? What is it that you want to leave behind with them?
This question has never been asked to me before.
It's tough.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I actually feel myself getting emotional. I'm picturing my two sons, and what is it that I wanted to? I think the thing that I would say is the way that I try to live my life, and I get it wrong sometimes, but I really try, always come from a place of love.
I'm getting goosebumps, and I'm getting ready to cry too. Just and
I really felt that question.
yeah, and I think I told you I was a nurse for 29 years, and half of those were in the trauma ICU, and so I've seen a lot of crazy stuff, and we just never know when our time is coming. But I love that quote because it just puts you in a place to really take each one of those words and think about what it means, and then back to your I wrote it all down, but it just ties into your beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. Really, when you think about that quote, it's all right. Well, here's my game plan. Let me put all these out, and what are the values of how am I going to carry that out? So when my time does come, and I want my two sons or my two daughters or a significant other, whoever it is, to know that this is what I stood for. These were the values of how I lived my life. These were the actions that I took. That, man, that's a life worth living, right there, or at least trying to achieve, and so, yeah, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming on again, listeners. It's been Bev Mitelman, and go to her website, securelylove.com. A lot of great resources there, and at least get on and take the quiz. She's got a free consult to all kind of classes, workshops, online courses. And I just think this was content that is just so applicable for any person that's breathing. Yeah, needs it. And thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you, Jeff. It was an absolute pleasure. You asked brilliant questions, and it was really an honor to speak with you. So thank you.
All right, listeners, you know how we do it. Boom, baby, that just happened. We out.